songwriter.
The photo is aging, droplets of sudden red.
Producer. Composer. Band leader. Recording studio honcho. And the founder of Create Interesting Music, which is a mentorship program which helps creative guitarists develop into full-fledged artists.
Yeah, it starts at like 3:45.
Yeah.
And ends at or something.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, just 2 bar, right?
Yeah,
Like
it goes, yeah, it happens twice. Measuring this in terms of like measures or bars is tricky, but yeah, I'm hearing a few things here. I'm gonna listen to it one more time and then I'll tell you about what I'm hearing. This is such a, yeah, thanks for asking about this. This is great. Super fun to talk about.
yeah, there's some primes in there. I'll share my notes once you have your notes.
Sure, yeah, yeah. Okay, so it starts on the 2 chord.
Starts on the you're just a little
Oh, I'm just coming in a little bit later.
yeah. It should start on G.
Oh, I hear it now. Okay. Cool.
That tail end little like hammer or like is
Oh
really
yeah.
but yeah, it's like power chords for the first bit. Which like I'm playing in drop D, so it's easier to do all the little goofy stuff.
Oh, cool.
I'll turn off the blurring and all that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and you can, if you want to go through like your initial notes, you can do that first too.
Cool. Yeah, so I think as far as like the Roman numeral stuff, I think you're pretty much picking up on it. I think that the chords themselves are not necessarily all that crazy. Um, I think yeah, they mostly sound like power chords, but there's something going on that that's really interesting that I think listening it can be a little bit obscured if you're not listening on like either like nice headphones or like nice monitors, which is that we're really listening to two different parts. And I think they're playing kind of the same thing at first, and then they kind of split off. And so one of them is these kind of like low distorted guitars that are being produced in really interesting ways. And then the other one is some kind of higher sound. If I had to guess, it would be other guitars that are being filtered through a bunch of things. And then there's a lot of high passing and low passing going on and like really, really, really heavy compression. Um, Yeah, I want to give it one more listen while I'm not like just trying to think in terms of Roman numerals to think about how these parts interact.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
second repetition is like so weird. Um and then I don't know if you want to pay attention to this at the same time, but I'm curious if like that pattern for the low guitars is like ping pong delay, like it's like da 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 da. It's like it's kind of subdivided in a weird way.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Also, just really quick note on stereo image. I guess I'll just, as a listening, I'll just kind of pause it. It's interesting that the low guitars are pretty wide and the higher sounds, which sound like also guitars, are pretty narrow. And so there's this like sides versus middle thing going on in the mix.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as the rhythm, I totally hear what you're talking about. I think there are a lot of different ways that that sound could be achieved. Um, it could be like if it's a ping pong delay, I think there are a lot of other effects happening after it. I'm just
Hmm.
gonna give it one more little check in here. Okay, yeah. So something that says to me that there is some delay in the proverbial mix, I guess, as well as the literal mix, but I was just, in the situation, um is that when we hear the chord move, um we hear we hear the chord move and then we hear the chord move again. So we're
Hmm.
listening to the same thing being played multiple times. But there's so much other stuff on top of it that it's not as literal sounding a delay as if everything's super clean and it's just like clean guitar delay, maybe a little bit of reverb where we hear it and it's the same sound. So I think the delay is like sort of a texture that's kind of in the middle of this sound for me if I were to imagine the signal chain. And so
Hmm.
it could be the case that the delay is what's creating like the rhythmic effect. Um,
Yeah.
but if I were to think about how to create that rhythmic effect, actually, I'm gonna listen. I'm just gonna keep on hitting play to check back in as I'm listening to this. The attack to me almost seems like more like a scoop. Also, I'm seeing you're dropping some things in the chat. Oh yeah, reverse reverb. Yeah, it could be reverse reverb. What I'm hearing is that like because with the attack, the volume seems to actually drop and then pick back up as opposed to spiking and going back down.
Hmm.
I basically have two thoughts. The first one is probably more how they did it, and the second one is the fast way that I would get that sound in in a DAW today. So I would guess that there's something else in the mix that this is side chained to. So there's this guitar sound being side changed to some like to there's compression that's being side changed from some other signal. I often will do this through like a kick drum attack. And so basically like I'm just imagining kick drum playing quarter notes or eighth notes or whatever being side chained to this, so that we get these little scoops. Because to me, I'm going to listen one more time before I make this statement definitively. Well, I'd have to do some real trial and error to say that this is definitely what's happening, but it sounds like the attacks aren't perfectly mapped to where I'm hearing delay. Like it's not like every time that I hear a dynamic shift, it's related to the chord reattacking. And so I think the delay is happening slightly differently than the pulse. It's also interesting to note that that pulse, that sort of, it's like a negative pulse. It's like a scooping out of the sound,
Yeah.
um, which I love, is it's not equal every time. Like it sounds pretty metronomic. I don't know if it's really strictly metronomic. Like I don't know, like I don't think it's necessarily literally like a drum machine, but the unevenness of the attack of the scoop indicates to me that the thing that they're side chaining from might be like a live drum set, or it could be another part. But because the attacks are not equal, it indicates to me that there's a person who's playing that instrument. And so that's why like the different attacks that are coming in that are scooping sound out of the guitar part are changing every time. So those are some things that I'm hearing, but it sounds like there's a lot of distortion and saturation that's applied after all of these effects. Because like if the thing that's scooping out the sound or creating the pulses at the end, we're really going to hear that negative space, but I'm hearing that negative space being colored by a bunch of other effects. And so, yeah, it's also very likely that these guitars were like double tracked, triple tracked, quadruple tracked, and all of that stuff too. So we might be listening to like tons of layers. Um, I could be wrong, but I do know I'm not like a historical like authority on this record or anything, but I do know that they went pretty hard with the production process here and got pretty deep into the sauce.
Yeah.
Um, and then something else that influences my perception of the rhythms that I think I would have heard really differently like 5 years ago, before I started like really actively prioritizing getting this stuff into my own work, is that the rhythmic element of the middle sound, the higher sound, is like related, I believe, to the side sounds, the lower distorted sound, but it's coming from a separate place. Like it doesn't sound like the same side chain or anything. But if I'm not being careful, those two rhythms will kind of mass together into one effect. And so when I'm listening really closely, I have to parse apart the different rhythmic things that are going on. And if I'm imagining how I get those sounds or how they might have gotten those sounds, I have to be really clear about like, oh, this sounds like it's passing through a different signal chain than the low distorted guitars. And although the effects create some composite thing in my perception, in reality, they're different signal chains. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to listen one more time while I kind of just give my kind of initial thoughts, and then I'd love to hear what you've got so far too. Well, actually, now that I'm listening to it more, it sounds like there's some kind of reverse dynamic curve there. Okay. Yeah, no, I think you're onto something. Okay, but I wanted to say something about that middle sound. Okay, one other just observation here is that the degree to which the performance that I'm hearing in the middle and the performance that I'm hearing on the sides overlap indicates to me that they might actually have the same source. It might be one guitar take that in the middle case is like pitch shifted up an octave. Um, and because I mean every part where the sound starts to break into feedback is exactly the same, which is so cool. And then also, yeah, the pulse in the high thing, obviously, like I think you've already got this, but like it doesn't sound like that's a hand that's doing that. It sounds like some kind of effect, like maybe a tremolo effect or something. Because yeah, it just sounds like an electronic pulse and not like a handmade kind of pulse. So those are some initial thoughts. Um, yeah, how does this playing G string toward the end of the first repetition? Word. Oh, and then just looking at your notes here, you asked, do I think it's 7/8? Um, hmm, that's a good question.
It's like 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, da 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 da.
Yeah, let's listen. That's a really interesting catch. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there's something going on there with Pulse that's really cool. And also, actually, for what I was just saying about how it sounds like maybe they're coming from the same signal chain, that changes partway through.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so subtle. It's like, this is why we're still listening to this and trying to break it down like 30 years later.
Yeah.
Wow. It could be. I mean, my first thought, which now I'm questioning, and it's so cool that there's this much to dig into here, is that like when I first heard it, I was like, it's kind of rubato. Like I just assumed that was what was going on. Like there's not playing to a steady pulse. But yeah, it really seems like there's something. I mean, I think because of how slippery all of the sound is, I can't necessarily literally pin it down to like one time signature, like 7/8 or something like that. Just putting my phone on focus here really quick. I can't necessarily pin it down to 7/8, but it sounds like there is a sound that is maybe either in some odd time signature, or it could just be somebody messing around playing something that they reversed somewhere along the line, um which is not in 4/4. Because like, although my brain hears it and kind of clumps it together and is like, yeah, all these chords are familiar and there's no drum, there aren't drums playing a crazy time signature, so therefore, and it's a rock band, so usually if there's an odd time signature you can hear it in the drums, like, so therefore it must be 4/4. But I think it's more just kind of in this, like, to me it's floating this kind of like, even if it's not literally rubato, like somebody might have been playing to a strange pulse. The perceptual effect is more in like a rhythmic space that I might associate with like a Tim Hecker or something, where it's unfolding in time, um, in a way that's not mapped to a literal pulse, but there's like a familiarity to all of the sounds, so it doesn't jump out as like capital letters, like odd time signature, in the way that a lot of rock music and sort of prog rock music's like, when you're in seven, you hear a drummer going or whatever that's like super obviously in seven, so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're kind of catching me at caffeinated o'clock as I fight the first day of a new cold, just caffeinating through it. So like I'm kind of going off right now, but yeah, how do you feel about this? What do you think?
Feel good. I'm curious. I don't know if you have a guitar with you, but I was
I do, yeah.
trying to figure out how to do all the voicing in one.
Mm,
Um, and I got like halfway through, so I haven't like fully committed to it yet.
yeah,
But I could show you some of my ideas and then see if you've
totally.
got anything.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's like I haven't jumped in my audio settings in a while. Do I do it up? Usually the live audio thing's on the top right, but I don't see it right now.
Oh yeah. If it's not there,
There we go.
oh,
Yeah,
okay, you got it. Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Um, cool. So I don't know if you want to see, but yeah, I did drop D so I could just do like that full block.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like given just standard drop D tuning, like having the open doesn't sound too crazy.
Yeah.
And like the B shows up in a few places,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like and so I put the G down there,
Mm.
and then for that last chord, you think it's like going back to one, but I think it's like doing this. Oh, maybe am I? Something's out of tune. But
Yeah.
I thought it was this shape, which would just be like that if it was standard tuning.
Right.
And then because it's like and like you could play the G here
Mm-hmm.
and get that same, but I also think that this is there.
Mm. Cool. Well, I have a couple of quick notes right off the bat. Um, cool. All right. Great call with the live performance audio. That's great. Okay, cool. So one of the things that made me really love how they played this, because I feel like when we're dealing with very familiar harmony, especially if it's in power chord form, just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, what makes it to me like what makes it hit or miss, or like what makes or breaks it, is everything else that they're doing with it. And one of the things that they're doing with it that made it feel really good to me is that when they go to the sixth chord, they go down instead of up. And so you had moved up to the sixth chord, but to me, it's like when we go to the sixth chord, it's funny because it's like we're climbing 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, but rather than going up high, when we get that sixth chord, but it's low, it's like stepping into a pool of water that's warmer than you thought it would be or something. Maybe that's a weird analogy, but it's like it's got this feeling that's really special and cool to me. So that's just like one thing right off the bat. The work that you're doing to kind of put it on the guitar is super cool. Really quick, what key is this in?
G.
G. Okay, cool. Okay, so then right, okay, so when you go to that E minor chord, it'd be like a low, like everything's happening on the second fret, 'cause you're in drop D sort of thing.
Yeah. And like
Okay, yeah, yeah.
I was also considering doing the six and the five just as power chords from the A
Mhm.
string.
Oh yeah, cool. Okay, and I've just got one other kind of clarifying question here. So when you're trying to get the full sound, and you're putting it all on one guitar, are you talking about the full sound of the low guitars or both the low sound and the high sound?
Low and the high.
Okay, so oh, that's so cool, and it's such an interesting challenge because like the timbres between the parts are like so different,
Hmm.
and it sounds like it's a lot of the same material but in different octaves, and so okay, so I'm just thinking about ways that we can break this down. This is a really cool challenge. I'll say low plus high parts at the same time. Okay, and so far, and I'm jumping around a little bit here, but it's like there's so much that could be talked about, and so part of what I'm doing, I feel like, is learning about what you've already done, and part of it's just getting the lay of the land for myself. This is really cool, sophisticated music, and then some of it's hopefully helping you work forward. And I'm kind of jumping around between those three roles, so I hope that's feeling clear and stuff. But okay. So, so far we've got the low chords, and after that sixth chord, you're going to the D chord, and you were playing it in that way. It's like that kind of low triad,
Yeah, I mean you could
or
also
try it on the 12th fret.
yeah,
Oh yeah, you could also do it really low.
because
Hmm.
um the E that I was playing.
Okay, I think we got to turn the live performance audio back on.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
So when you play it on the 12th fret,
Mhm.
it's the same as just the open. So like you could
Right. Oh yeah.
but
Okay.
yeah.
So I've got two questions that branch off from there. One is more of a, well, maybe it's a question and maybe it's just like a task that we should figure out, which is like, what are they doing in the original recording?
Hmm.
And then question two is, how does either that or the choices that we make about how to put it onto the guitar, putting it onto the fretboard, relate to our goal of playing both that and the higher voices at the same time? So do you know like, have you figured out where they're playing that D chord in the recording on the guitar?
Um the E is the six.
Oh, sorry, the D chord, my bad.
The D is the five. Um that one was the question mark because
Okay.
it it changes at the end. So if you listen back, it goes from the six to the five and then five prime.
Okay.
And like
Yeah.
something like releases, like something subtly changes that makes it sound really nice.
Yeah. Let's listen to it again. Let's check back in. Also, this is so cool because I never really like analyzed this music. Like I listened to it, but I haven't really dug in deeply. So it's cool to get to talk about this. All right. Let's jump to the beginning of the section ish.
Hmm.
Okay, so I think this sounds to me like it's where the parts break off. It sounds like the lower guitars go down and the higher guitars go up. Let's listen a little more deeply, or at least I need to listen a little more deeply. Yeah, I'm sure you're listening very deeply already. Yeah, okay. Ooh. Okay, so okay, so see something in the chat here. It's an F sharp on the high one. Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah. It sounds like they're basically the low voice goes to the actual five, and then the higher voice goes to the major third of the five chord,
Hmm.
or in the scale that we five and seven. And so there are different ways that we can figure out like exactly what's going on here based on how granular we want to be. And so if we want to really be like note for note hyper accurate, what we can do, and this was actually super helpful for me when I was really working on like jazzier training stuff, is like open up this file in a program that lets you isolate and loop audio. And I think you mentioned already doing that. And so what we can do especially if you're listening on speakers that really give you the full spectrum of frequencies. You get the low register and everything, like actual, like fundamentals, like 50, you can hear 50 hertz or whatever. um is loop like a 3-second section and identify every note that's in the chord and try to sing it first and then put it on the instrument. And then you can kind of sort of um oh yeah, you just dropped something else in the chat. Yeah, that's what I was trying. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So it's some combination of like deduction and induction where you're like trying to sing things. You're also like, how would that fit on the guitar? And so one of the things that I'm listening for here, just I know that you're already doing that, but it's kind of for the sake of the recordings. I might share this. This is really cool to talk about. Is like basically when we have um that low six chord, that low E minor chord, are we hearing the second fret drop down to an open string? Are we hearing that low E drop down to a low D? Because most of where my ear goes is from that E minor, basically up the string set to like A and D, like higher up. But it could just be the case that that low D is quieter and that they've like rolled off the bass frequencies enough that it's harder to hear that note. So I'm going to listen to it one more time, kind of with that in mind. Also, is it helpful how I'm kind of breaking up my thought process here?
Mhm.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think my ear might be filling this in, but I think it makes sense to go down to that really low D power chord.
Mhm.
I believe I'm going to listen one more time, but that's the way I'm leaning. Ooh, do, 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 do. Ooh. You know what? I've got to get out my guitar because I'm in it. I'm in the question, and there are a few things that it could be, and I need to get inductive and start guessing on the instrument, try out some options. Um, awesome. Yeah, and it's just like right on the other side of my computer, so I'm just gonna grab it.
Mhm.
Also, wow, I'm at my girlfriend's apartment right now because the heat is on in my building for some reason, even though it's like 75 degrees out. So my apartment kind of like an oven. Uh, and wow, I should totally have cool posters behind me that indicate that I'm like a person who knows things about culture, and it makes me look way more legit. So, all right, drop D time. This is really cool. Popping the headphones back on. Whoop.
Yeah, I just don't hear the E, like the low E and the low D. I still
Yeah,
hear, and I don't have live performance audio, but like I still just hear like
yeah.
yeah,
I think
I
I
think
just
I just
really
really
want
want
there to
there
be
to
a
be a
low
low
D.
D. Yeah.
Oh, I
Oh,
need
I
to
need to
double
double
check
check
my
my
intoning
intonation
or
or
tuning
tuning
here.
here.
Okay.
Okay. And I think I have live performance on. I think that the 5 goes from being a bar chord or a power
Yeah.
chord. Sorry. Yeah. So it's like it just goes, and then it goes to this, and that's that subtle
Yeah,
thing.
totally. Yeah, yeah, that what you're just playing sounds really right. Yeah, I think I'm not hearing that low string. And I think that I was hearing in a lower resolution way than what you just offered, but to me it sounds like at first we're hearing really a D major triad, which becomes a D major power chord.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because so much of the tension, harmonic tension that we've talked about, taking my glasses off so I'm not like hiding behind screen reflections here. So much of like harmonic tension that we talked about basically has to do with things resolving to triads, but it's interesting resolving from a triad to a power chord. And I think without going too deep into it right now, although we can go deeper into it if you want, I think some of that has to do with how distortion works, where basically a power chord and like a single note are like kind of the sounds that are going to work best through distortion. And kind of like the more harmonic information you introduce to a chord, kind of the noisier and like arguably worse it's going to sound. Not always worse. Here they're really using it very intentionally. But like yeah, like when it resolves to the power chord, it's a much less intense sound for my ears. So it feels like it's like a reduction in intensity or like a reduction in dissonance. Yeah, and I think the way that you just played that sounds fantastic. Um, and so I mean I definitely would put like a stamp of approval on that just based on what we've gotten so far, as far as just like, yeah, I think that's fantastic. And so my next two thoughts there are like, one, if we were to try sticking like a ton of distortion on this, what would that do to the sound? And then obviously also, or not obviously, but also so much of the sound of this is like heavy distortion, but with the high frequencies super rolled off. There's like some low pass filtering going on here. And then, and maybe this is where we're gonna have to start getting creative with the guitar, in like a problem solving way. How with how you just played it, how can we work in the higher voice?
Um, so if you want to listen back, I
Mm-hmm.
think the higher voice comes in kind of by virtue of the way that the six is played so high
Mm-hmm.
up.
Mm.
And then the five is when you bring in that G string.
Yeah.
And then you use the G when you go back to one
Mm-hmm.
to play a D
Mm-hmm.
on the G. And then from there, I don't know if the progression actually moves this way, but like you could just use that shape.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Could I hear you just play through that the cycle or the chords that you just mentioned? Yeah, yeah. Cool. Awesome.
Yeah. So like I think that this is the first note that the high voice has.
Yeah.
And then and then so I guess like because of the way this is played, you can just get that like subtle change that happens. And then I still haven't like mapped that out, but I imagine once I map out what the high voice is doing, it'll be easier. But like in a generic campfire way, like you could just do the second part with this. And I don't think it goes that high.
Mm.
I think it just goes back to that like but then there's also something weird that happens if you listen to the second repetition. It's like there's like a quick hammer or like a nana type of thing. I haven't mapped that out either, but that's
Yeah.
when stuff starts getting funny.
Yeah. Let's listen back in.
Yeah.
And then also there's something that you're doing that I think is really great, which is like being able to participate in what's going on with kind of different degrees of granularity or like detail, where yeah, it's like if we wanted to reduce this in a way in terms of complexity, so we're maybe not being totally faithful to like what's going on with the harmony, but we're keeping the basic idea. It's like, yeah, if the first time around you're just playing lower notes, lower strings, and then the second time you start adding upper notes on the chords, then we do get that feeling of like a higher voice that's branching off from the lower voice. So that's already kind of like a simple way to create a similar effect, even if it's not all the exact same notes. And that's already happening, which is really cool. But yeah, let's listen a little more deeply, and I'll listen for this kind of hammer-on pull-off thing that's happening. Yeah, and already, I mean, like the higher part and the lower part branch apart. I think when we get to the 5 chord or the 6 chord, but I am still hearing the high part here. It's just that it's pretty much in unison with the lower part, except that there's, it's a different timbre. There's a tremolo that's moving at a different rate. So we kind of have two different rhythms going on at the same time. Yeah. Okay. Last shape of trick. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So I'll just keep listening and see where we get this hammer on pull off thing. Oh. Hmm. Do do do. Yeah. Oh, let's see what you're saying in the chat. It's the last shape I was showing there. When you said there, was that very last chord?
Yeah, the da da.
Yeah. Okay. So one really quick observation immediately is that these really once they kind of branch apart, like we're talking about, this really sounds like a high voice and a low voice that are being played separately. And so I am hearing the low voice change things in different ways. Sorry, the high voice change things in different ways than the low voice. And so there are some places where they'll change at different times. And so that means the high voice will kind of have an effect of, it's like when we were doing counterpoint stuff, like if you hold a note over, well, you change the bass note and then you resolve the other note later. It's like a suspension, you know? So there are elements of that just because the low voice will change sometimes before the high voice or slightly after or whatever. So we get those effects. But yeah, on that very last chord, I hear relative to whatever that chord is, and I'll figure that out. We can talk about that in a second. I hear like a do do do. There's some sort of 2-3 2-3 thing happening in the higher voice. Okay, and it's on a G chord. Um, I mean, I don't think that's exactly how they played it, but we've got G, right? It's something like that. I mean, when I'm playing on an acoustic guitar without the distortion, probably in a slightly different way than they played it, this sounds like happy video game music, so it's not exactly the same thing. But I think those are the notes, 2 and 3 in the key. So that's A and B moving back and forth. Does that help? Is that kind of like a way in?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
And I wonder if they're like in the second part, if they're hammering the entire power chord, like a like some of them slide and some of them kind of have this like hammer pull off thing. The other thing that is interesting, if you listen to the second repetition after the D, that like has a D and then a D prime.
Yeah.
When you're back in G, it like, if you listen to the low notes, particularly like the low E string, it doesn't move as much. It's no longer climbing. It's kind of like, and then like the other stuff is kind of
okay.
I don't know.
That's really cool.
What it is, but
yeah. Okay. Well, just quick thought.
It's like turn on this. Oh.
Well, maybe I'll turn on the light, overhead light in a second. Okay. So when we're doing something where there's this much going on a measure by measure basis, this is like getting to the point where, for me at least, the first time just like checking in on a lot of this stuff, it's a lot to keep track of in my head. And so a really useful tool for figuring this out could be if we wanted to either write something down like on paper, like on manuscript paper where we have like lines and stuff like that, or potentially on like some sort of Google Doc, but like I find that paper could be really good for this, is if we write out, sort of imaginary measures for each chord. And we don't exactly know where the measures change because the sense of pulse is very like loose. And like it sounds like maybe the low guitars aren't in aren't in 4/4, and the higher voice is pulsing much more kind of regularly. So time gets really wavy, but we can sort of create imaginary bars. We can even use dotted bar lines as a way to just indicate loose indications of time. And then, I mean, we can write in actual note heads if we want, but more importantly, what we can do is take notes on what's happening in every measure. And so if, for example, the second time through, we write, six, like maybe halfway down the page, we start taking notes on what's going on the second time through, because there's so much to write down about what's going on in the first half. But the second time through, we go down to the second half, we write in some, like dotted bar lines, and then we write in the chord names on the top. So we have like G, A, or like G5, A5, B5, C5, E5, D becoming D5, whatever, and D, 5 just being a power chord. But then we can start to take different types of notes. If we notice, for example, that there's like a pedal point, or like a pedal tone, and I'll introduce this term. I don't know if we've talked about it. But if we notice something like this, we can write that in. And so what a pedal point is, or like a pedal tone, is like it comes, I think, from like pianos, where there's a pedal that you can hold down where you play a note and it sustains. So a pedal tone would be like if we have the same note in the bass, but the chords keep changing. So it's not quite a drone, because a drone has different kind of like philosophical implications, but it's something that's drone-like. So it would be like if we're holding G in the bass while we play a bunch of different chords on top of it, or if we're droning one open string while we have a bunch of chords moving around, but eventually that open string resolves, So if it resolves, that's an indication that it's not really like a drone in the cosmic sense or whatever, but it's just a note that's sustained that's drone-like. That would be like a pedal point. So, for example, if we realize that in the whole second half of the form, or the whole second half of this section, we have a G in the bass, we could literally just write a G in on the manuscript paper and just like kind of tie it across all the measures or draw a line, And then once we have that in mind, there's a question, which is, how can we possibly play all these chords on the guitar if we're supposed to have that in the bass the whole time? But that becomes a question that follows, because then that's like really a kind of a creative guitar arranging question, which is like, how can we arrange this part that was originally played on multiple guitars, almost definitely, on one guitar? But if you are taking all these notes on one piece of paper, then you can see all of the challenges and basically build an arrangement on like a measure by measure basis where you can include all of this information. And so, yeah, what that'll allow you to do is just distinguish all these things. Because like, it's like if I'm trying to hold everything in my head about what's going on with the higher voice while I'm trying to figure out how to play all the chords that are changing with a G in the bass in a sustained way, that's like a lot of challenges at the same time. And so being able to break those into parts and like work on them in some order is just a way to make sense of the challenge. So that's more of a creative strategy thing, or like separating analysis and arrangement or whatever, all the different things that we're doing. So that's kind of just like a framework for how to move forward. Does that make sense? And two, does that seem helpful?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So just in the analysis phase, focus on the notes and the parts, voices, and then in the arrangement, figure out how to Frankenstein them together if you want them to be all in one guitar.
Yeah, and I mean, also it's cool. I mean, you're figuring out this like in a hands-on way with the guitar, and so you can be like building the arrangement as you go. But if you're using, if you're taking notes on what's going on, that can just be helpful because it means that you don't have to hold so much in your head all at once. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that analysis happens completely. You make a complete analysis before you play any of it on guitar. But it's just like if you're taking notes as you go, then if you get to a point where you're like, whoa, wait, what's going on? It's just a lot easier to keep track of what it is that you're doing and what you're trying to do. Yeah. Yeah, and then there might also, as far as like putting these multiple things on the guitar, there might be some trade-offs at a certain point. Like you might realize that if you want to get something that's coming from the high voice while you're playing the chords that are changing, maybe like the G pedal tone will have to like disappear for like half of a measure. Like it's there for the first two beats of a measure, and then it's not there for the next two beats. Then you hear it again on the downbeat of the next measure. And so
Mhm.
then it's like there's a question there of like, even if it's not literally sustained the whole time, does it stay in your ear enough that it's basically there even though you're not playing it, or when it comes back, does it sound like it's returning, like, is there
Mhm.
a way that you can kind of massage the way that you're playing it so that it feels like it's there even when it's not, for example, so those are some kind of thoughts on arrangements. Anyway, I don't mean to just like throw tons of thoughts and ideas at you. So yeah, I'm super down to talk about anything here that seems particularly important to you. And it could be, yeah, basically whatever you need.
Yeah. Um, I don't know. I think in terms of like adaptation into
Mm-hmm.
like my own arrangement, I still think that the use of the six chord is the apex of um, emotionality.
Mm,
Like when the six chord hits in this song, it has a really strong effect. And that was the same thing with Sometimes, which I
yeah.
think the six is uh, the second in the progression. So
Yeah.
it's like 1, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2 type of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. I think like I'm still just trying to figure out, okay, what like the song's great, I like it. What pieces of it feel adaptable and what do they mean?
Mm,
I remember sharing that concept in the channel about like getting stuck and then just trying to like name like come up with a single word for the way that I'm playing each chord
mm,
and then like use that to abstract. Like I think you were doing a similar thing where you're just like write down random numbers, but this way is like not using numbers and just using words and trying to
yeah.
write a poem. So I still think that that will come into play. um, if you want to talk about pedals, I've been having some sound issues, like just trying to get the right tone, which could be a bunch of factors. Obviously your guitar, your amp, and the way the settings are set up.
Hmm.
With the Mustang, like you get that phasing if you set the bridge and the neck opposing each other.
Whoa.
Um, and that kind of like helps cut out a lot of the low end and make it kind of just like
Mm,
really mid and kind of spiky.
mhm.
But for some reason, I can't get the amount of fullness that I'm hoping to get. Um, the compressor pedal helps, but I don't know if you have advice on what to put where in a chain.
Mhm.
Um, and maybe some sort of like rules of thumb or tips and tricks
Yeah.
for getting the right tone, like kind of dialing in the right tone instead of just like spending an hour
Oh yeah.
messing around.
Totally. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So we've got some thoughts about how to like basically what to do with this as you're figuring it out. And so just kind of side question on topic one. And then so well, that's topic one. Topic two is like pedals and getting tones and stuff. So with topic one, we've got when we're talking about adapting it, it's based on what you're saying, it sounds like we're talking about what can we learn from this to adapt to your own like writing and performing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, yeah. Well, let's start there. And so just to be clear, we're talking about taking concepts from this that we can apply to future music making rather than talking about how to understand what's going on in this song.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess my first question is what like tell me, maybe just tell me about this section. Tell me about this part of this piece of music.
Um, I would say, like, in terms of what I like about it, or tell you about it, like,
Well, I was going to say tell me what you like about it, but maybe I mean
right?
that's part of it. Maybe just yeah, like if you were to just if you were to talk to me about it, like
Yeah, like a
yeah,
book
what
report.
would you say? Yeah.
I'd say that I've this piece of music is only 30 seconds long, and it's the tail end of a song, and I think it's in a different key from the original song um, that's played before it. And it's got sort of an un uh, not an unidentifiable rhythm, but a slightly abstract rhythm that makes it interesting to listen to. And while the progression itself is pretty simple and the chord structures aren't like really floral, or like all over the place, it's just power chords. Um, the way in which the subtleties come through make it an interesting piece. And you want it to last longer, obviously, because it's so short. And um, there's a lot happening with how the guitar is being played and how the signals are being processed and kind of like packaged. Um, and that adds a lot more to it than maybe kind of a bedroom rendition of this. Uh,
Yeah, and just really quick when you say it adds a lot more to it. Um could you tell me more about what you mean by it?
it's um, effective power. It's uh, adds a lot more to.
Like kind of like the experience of listening to it, maybe?
Yeah, and like the signature sound that they've come up with. There's something with its delivery that stands apart from a lot of other things that you've heard. um, but it's like a My Bloody Valentine song.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I think what's been interesting listening to other shoegaze albums um, is that you don't get this like really wide sound. Like when I listen to Swirlies, it's got that kind of like boxed in studio sound. Um, some of their stuff is like lo-fi, which is different, but
More some of MBV or you said Swirlies, is that another shoegaze band?
yeah.
Word.
We studied one of the Swirly songs
Right,
maybe
okay.
two
And that
semesters.
was the one with the droning E and B chord or strings? Okay,
Yeah.
right. I remember that one. Okay, cool.
Um, and yeah, I guess like trying to think of anything else that I can book report on the song itself. Maybe just kind of like the if you were thinking of it as counterpoint, like the unison movement and then the divergence and the subtle bass changes that like we're trying to pin down in the second part that make it really cool. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah. So overall, I'd say yeah, all of those things combined is what makes this um, a north star for my own uh, arranging styles and kind of like the end goal. It's like, oh yeah, like I would love to have something that is simple but complex and subtle and um yeah, there's just lots to chew on there. but it's not, you know, overly over the top. Like classical music is very complex, but it's rarely simple. You know, it's like
Yeah,
all over the place.
totally. Yeah. Well, really quick comment on that note. Something that I'm really kind of trying to chase down in my own music making is like there are things that if you try to break them down in terms of like older forms of analysis, like functional harmony, like we can talk about it going to the sixth chord or whatever, that like our breaking down what's going on with the chords might not be super complex, but because of everything that's going on, and a lot of it has to do with sound and production and stuff like that, there's a lot going on with it that really has an effect on us and is very distinctive. Um, and yeah, I mean, some of it can be explained through techniques, but I don't think it can be reduced to techniques because I think there's something artistic that's it's magical in the colloquial sense that's going on here. And so like yeah, and it has something to do with the effect that it has on us, like the way that the sound kind of communicates to us in this kind of like non-verbal way. And I think often music theory kind of falls short, or, music theory, harmonic analysis really falls short of making sense of those things that are like, that aren't happening on the level of language. They're happening somewhere else, which doesn't mean that they can't be explained, but it's just they're not happening on a language level. And so trying to put them into words is like, it's a challenge. It's like a challenge of thought, and it's a challenge of being able to distinguish what we're feeling and what we're noticing and stuff like that. And yeah, I mentioned this because it's something I think about and I'm working on in my music like a lot. So that's just a kind of a side point. But okay, so it's amazing that in this like kind of 30-second fragment, one, we spent almost exactly, I think, an hour making just or a little over an hour, like just making sense of it. And it's 30 seconds of music. And it feels like we're really still only kind of like we're starting to make some sense of it, but there's still a lot to dig into, which is amazing. I don't feel like I don't think we've robbed it of any of its beauty or power or anything. And I feel like we could just keep digging. So beyond just that is like that's so cool. That's amazing. I typed up a bunch of notes on what you were saying in our chat, which I'll screenshot here. Just so that I've got this stuff screenshotted. Okay. So if you're looking at this, what components of this do you feel you already have some handle on being able to access in your own work? And what are the things here that feel like there's something about them that you're not currently getting from the work that you're making?
Yeah, I think um, in terms of like the closest sound to this that I've done in the past, which we
Mhm.
demoed like a month or two ago with what's his name, Tristan, the guy with the long hair?
Oh, I'm not sure. Um,
Your friend from you met him in camp or like a music camp?
oh, Damon?
Yeah, might have been
Oh
Damon.
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, music school. Yeah.
Um, yeah, like I in the stuff that I've made so far, I've enjoyed the amount of sounds that I can stack on top of each other and like you get to pay attention to like one sub frequency and then another sub frequency and they all have kind of like their own song going on, but uh I focused more on like loops and just kind of like didn't get a lot of uh dynamism throughout other than like effects processing stuff. So the one thing that I think is a reason why I came uh, into the create interesting music uh, school was just to try to understand how I can create that movement without being over the top, like I said. So like I can like so far throughout learning, it's like, oh, I can understand how to figure out seven cool chords and kind
Mhm.
of like move across them and make something. Um, but I'm falling short with like getting the right amount of spices. So like, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
an analogy, it's like I know how to cook simple dishes, and then I'm
yeah.
coming here and learning a lot more about cuisine,
Hmm.
but I'm just like pouring a bunch of stuff in and hoping that it tastes good instead of like fine tuning and restraining myself in certain places, and being like,
Yeah,
this is the right amount.
totally. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And yeah, one, it's just so cool to see the work you've done so far because it's a lot easier to talk about all this stuff once we know what all the spices are, you know. Also, I'm just gonna turn on this overhead light really quick.
Sure.
Cool. Okay. So, um, yeah. Okay, this is opening up a really interesting door. I think, I mean, depending on how time plays out for the rest of the time that we've got today, it could be cool to spend some time talking about pedals, but I feel like talking about pedals is a lot more straightforward. And what we're talking about here is stuff that's a lot, these are high level questions. It's stuff that is, I don't know if we could find answers about how to do this on YouTube or whatever, because this really gets away from specific techniques or specific types of chords. And it really gets more into like artistry. Um, and I think the way to teach artistry seems to happen primarily through conversations where we can ask a lot of questions. Because, if you had just showed up and been like, explain this section to me, I mean, you had a lot of ideas. It's been a conversation, but I could have focused on something that wouldn't have been useful at all to you. So having it be some sort of back and forth, we're asking a lot of questions is a helpful way to do this. So, um, I think also just side note, I think Sam is working on some similar questions. I think she's at a different stage in working on it, but basically, how can you have something in her case that's like restrained but also maximalist in a way? And I feel like maybe you're like less oriented towards like maximalism, but basically, there's a question of how do you create something that has a lot going on in a way, but doesn't draw attention to itself as such.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also this question of working with loops versus working out with other ways. So I think step one, and I actually go through this every time that I'm making a track. I really build what I'm about to describe into my own creative process. And it's creative. It's also like sort of a production process, not so much music production, but just making something, the act of making something. So let's say that you're hearing something, and I'm going to halfway port over to the spice analogy. So you're making a piece of music and it's got all these spices in it. You don't know what any of them are. Then there's a lack of knowing what to even start doing to get the sound right. And then there's a stage where you know what the spices are, but in this case, the use of all the spices is very, very subtle. I think it can be helpful to go through a stage where you're just being completely insane with the amount of spice that you're adding so that you know what happens when you go to the extremes with each of those things. And this isn't necessarily for making music that you're going to release, but it's just for getting a handle on what's going on. Um, and then we enter into something which really is art making. It's and art making I think requires taste and it requires like trust in oneself in a different way, because when we really are trying to make something distinctive and personal, there is no manual that's going to come from anybody else on exactly how to do it, but there are a lot of things about what like steps that you can take and processes that you can go through where the details you already know because you already learned the spices and stuff. But general shape would be, um to get super applied, something that I often do when I'm working on something is, when I feel stuck with something or it's not giving me what I want to. And often it's because I'm being restrained in my initial steps forward. I'm like, I don't want too much of this. I don't want too much of this. I'll get something that feels like it's like 40% of the way there. And there's like a core to it that I like, but it's not that interesting yet. Or it's not that like, it's pretty bland. It's like a step in the right direction, but it's not where it's supposed to be. So then, and I've gotten a lot better at this, but it's taken me a while. I'll go through a process where for a couple of like sessions, and it used to take me months and like months on end, or in some cases like years on end for some tracks on my first record. And now it's like 2 or 3 nights in the studio. I'll try to like just sort of go like first thought, best thought, add a ton of stuff go for a walk. And I've started to work in these 90-minute increments where I'll work on something for 90 minutes and I'll take 30 minutes off and I'll like have a snack or walk around the block or like go to the deli and get like, you know, coffee for $1.50 and then come back to the studio or whatever. And then I listen to it and there's way too much of whatever this thing was that I added. But the thing that I just added, like there's like a core to it that is a step in the right direction, even though all the details are not right. But, and also often the core of the thing that I added is not what I found on minute 5 of adding the new texture or whatever. It's what I found on minute like 75 of adding the new texture. Because it takes me that much time to work through all of the cliches around the stuff and get to whatever this, like whatever the real fresh distinctive thing is that feels honest to me. So it's that process of attempting to make that gets me eventually to the core of something. And then usually when I step away and then I come back to it, I can hear what the core of this new thing is. It's like that spice that I discovered, but there's all this other stuff around it that's totally extraneous. And so then I'll often cut away more than I actually need. And so I'll leave this new spice that I only found through a lot of experimentation, and then that's in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
But all that extra stuff gets pulled away. And then maybe it's enough and maybe it's not. And in my case, often now, and I wonder how this would show up for you, given that you've been like making music for a long time. But for me now, it usually only takes 1 or 2 passes per part to get to something that's pretty satisfying for me. But you know, for me, it's like if I do that with the guitars or like guitars and synths or like the harmony layer, which is like, you know, pitch instruments that are not the bass and not the voice, basically. Maybe I'll find something that I like, but then it reveals to me that there's something in the drum part that's bugging me or something in the voice part that's bugging me. And so, like we talked about process, I think the last time that we talked, there's kind of the circularity there. But for me, usually for an instrumental part or a group of instrumental parts, it'll only take a few passes to get to something. But if we're talking about something that's more abstract, like more experimental music or kind of like Basinski/Tim Hecker music, things get a lot wavier when instruments don't have parts that are so like predefined, you know? And so we can totally talk about that too. But yeah, basically the way that I do this is that you add something, you take a lot of things away, because like adding stuff, whether it's parts or spices, and maybe by spice here I just mean like the core of whatever it is that you get to by adding new chords or adding new instruments or whatever. Perceptual simplicity, I'll drop this phrase in the chat, which might be the type of simplicity that we're talking about. Perceptual simplicity means that there isn't, or at least in this context, or according to me, means there isn't a ton of stuff that's jumping out to grab your attention. So you can listen to it, and it's not like there's a million new pieces of information every second. So it's kind of like just this thing, and you observe the thing, and it can be really interesting beneath the surface, but it's not jumping out at you, you know? It's like if you find a rock that's really interesting, the rock isn't, it's kind of inanimate. Like it's not trying to get your attention, but if you look at it, you're like, whoa, there are all these different strands of like quartz and like all these other things in it, you know? And so there's the question of how you create something interesting that's perceptually simple. And it's by prizing, I think, that perceptual simplicity as you go. And so it's being willing to take things away and add more things, but with the awareness that whatever it is that you sign off on at the end of the process, you've respected that desire for this sort of perceptual simplicity, where you've stripped a lot of things away but kept the core of things that are interesting. And then I think also every time that you go through the process, you find you'll get a little bit closer to the thing that you want. Or maybe it'll be, you know, not a straight line towards the thing that you want, but it'll kind of do this, you know? And then just one other comment, because you said a lot of things and they're all really great, is sort of loop-based work versus non-loop-based work. And I wrote in the notes here, like Basinski versus Tim Hecker, you know, where like Basinski's work is obviously like he's like a loops person. And that's really cool in some ways. And it's also a huge limitation. And I think he makes the most of it. But for my tastes as a musician, I like maybe it would be cool to work with tape loops at some point for like the timbre of tape, you know? But it's been, to me, I think that's too limiting a framework for how things can develop. Mm-hmm. And so it's really interesting is comparing that to somebody like Tim Hecker's process, where there are interviews where Tim Hecker talks about how like he doesn't know what his process is. He just keeps on messing with sounds basically until he gets something that feels right. And I think he actually knows a lot more than that. Like if you were forced to like sit down, like if you were forced at gunpoint to like sit down and explain exactly how he made something, I'm sure he'd have a lot to say. Like saying I don't know what my process is like shorthand. But I think what I get from him saying that is that there is this process of experimentation, of adding things and taking things away and transforming things that ends with some process where you can't see the end result from the beginning, but you can take a series of steps or undergo sort of a series of maneuvers that will end up with something that you like. That couldn't be something literally that you imagined at the beginning, but maybe it corresponds to like a gut feeling that you had at the beginning that you couldn't quite explain. So that's a long speech about that. Does that make sense?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, like, when I think about actually applying this, um, with the digital 8 track that I have, um, I think maybe this happens to a lot of people, but I'll get locked up trying to get things perfect
Mm,
on the first take. Not necessarily like my first take, literally, but
yeah,
like I'm just trying to get a guitar part down and then I just like keep doing takes until it's really good so I don't have to mess with it later.
yeah,
Versus let me just like sing this voice and then sing this voice and then sing this voice. And then once I have something that has the right structure, redo the track for this voice, redo the track for this voice, redo the track for this voice.
yeah.
So so that like cuz I think when you like talk about like play, like in terms of just like being playful
Hmm.
and like open to whatever happens,
Yeah,
it's it's tricky to what would you say? Like it's tricky to end up with something that's good and I never it's hard like in the moment. It's either just like one or the other. Like I'm just like
right.
going for it or I'm like really trying to do it right versus like oh yeah, I go for it for a while and then I do it right and then I get back into play and then I like tighten that up and then
Yeah,
like maybe I re-record the entire song with the structure I want and the sound I want. Because like
right.
what I'm focusing on now is like getting structure to a good spot. Whereas like previously I just hit a really hot moment where there's a lot of creative energy and just get out
Hmm.
everything that I can and then like kind of like polish the turd later. Like I didn't I didn't track things maybe the way I wanted, but like I just dress it up until it sounds good and I'm like, well, you know, that was
Yeah,
that moment.
totally. Well, there's a lot of value to the process that you're describing for sure. And you've also made a lot by this point, which is really cool. Like you've been pretty prolific. So I think I kind of have like a short term answer and like a longer term answer. I think the short term answer is that it sounds like the processes that you've been using aren't quite getting you the results that you're after.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the music that we're talking about, whether it's Tim Hecker or like My Bloody Valentine, like these bands specifically, and there are a lot of other people who like don't work this way. These are people who do have a process. I mean, definitely with Tim Hecker and probably with My Bloody Valentine, where there's like a lot of experimentation. And the tricky thing about those experimental processes, and this is the thing I'm figuring out, is like, yeah, it's like if you're tracking, you want to get the part that you're playing as good as possible. And yet, if you're adding too much, there's a chance that you're going to get attached to that part and you listen to it later and you're like, ah, it's not quite right. And
Mm-hmm.
and that's hard for me. This is where digital recording technology is very helpful because I can just like see, a waveform and just cut out everything except for two measures, which saves a lot of time. That's more of a side comment than like a continuation of this thought. But basically, this process that we're describing, which is a process of experimentation, which results in, an end result that we couldn't have predicted. That's a very different process than like going in with being like, here's the song and I'm going to track it. And the thing is, and I think this is the longer term thing. Oh yeah, and so actually before I get to the longer term thing, uh this process of experimentation, one of the big challenges is not getting lost in the sauce for months or years, you know? And like for me, like whatever, like I did that and now I'm kind of glad that I did that. Like if there were some basic technical fixes I could have made that would have made it like would have made everything go a lot faster. But there's also a process fix, which is that like the more I just prioritize going through the cycle over and over, I just realized that it is like this sort of state that you've mentioned where you show up and you feel creative and things are just clicking and it's like a moment in time. But I try to put that through this sort of iterative try things, remove things, try things, remove things process. And as I fall in love with the process as much as the result, it means that I can add things without being too worried or maybe too precious about like, oh, I really put a lot of work into writing or recording those guitar parts and now I have to cut them away. Because for me, that's all part of the process. And I've gone through the cycles enough. And I haven't released music that I've made this way yet, but it's I'm just like, I'm gonna drop like a shit ton of stuff next year, I think. Which is cool. And it marks a major change in my life and my creative work and stuff. So I'm excited about that. But like at this point, I'm excited about that process of making stuff up and then finding new things on the other side. And so it's not necessarily more time consuming. I mean, it's not instant. It's not like going to the studio and do 2 takes and you keep the second take, but it doesn't have to be a years long process, you know? So that's kind of my short term thing is that it is a different way of working, but it's starting to get really fun, at least for me. Cause I'm just like, I show up and I have no idea. Maybe a track will go a totally different way than I thought. I think it's going to go over here and I've got this start point and then I do this and I kind of go, ooh, but then maybe I find my way back over here. But I discover all these things along the way that change the end result in some way that feels very right, but I never could have seen coming. And also, just a side note there, when I listen to what I'm working on, like today, I'm not in the studio because I'm teaching and I rent my studio out on Thursday nights. There's a track that I'm working on, and yesterday, I just discovered a bunch of things that I never could have seen coming. And I'm just like, listen, I was listening to it today, and I was like, whoa, this, this is a demo that I made in November, and now I'm working on it, and I'm like, this is a totally different thing than I thought. But I'm like excited about that discovery feeling. And so when I work on it tomorrow or on Saturday, I'm as excited to see just how it ends up after I go through this discovery process as like, I've got to write the right guitar part. And so also I have to like, I was listening to it. I try to not listen to things too much when I'm not actively working on them because I'll be like, like, what do I need to change? And the truth is that once I get my hands on it, I'm going to change a lot. And I'm going to change a lot of things that I might not be able to see coming because I might know what the first step is. I'm like, I gotta mute that guitar or I gotta cut that out in that part. But then I listen to that spot and I'm like, wait a second, what can I put in that spot? And then I might go off on some tangent, that I never could have seen coming. And because I'm actually turning all the knobs and adding instruments and stuff, it becomes this process that is literally impossible to foresee when I'm not putting my hands on it. And so this is also a Rick Rubin thing where he was asked at one point, like, do you do you take recordings home? Do you listen to stuff you're working on? He's like, no, I only listen to it when I'm in the studio. And he gets to do that now probably because he's like, he's been doing this for a long time and stuff. And so I'm sure obsessing was part of his process at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like imagining walking around a city by like knowing about one intersection. It's like once you turn onto the next street, you're going to see a ton of new things. So that's kind of a process note. That's all short term. Longer term, what happens often through this process of experimentation is that you develop a lot of new skills and you discover a lot of new sounds. And at the end of that process of discovery, you might actually have just a new set of things that you can do quickly. And so when you're working on a piece of music, you'll be like, oh, and then I'll do this and I'll do this. And the whole order will just play out in your head. And you can literally just go through that process and get a result that you want. But to find those things in a way that feels honest and is like your own or is one's own, I think that at some points in one's development as a musician or as specifically like a recording musician, or especially as a recording musician, periods of experimentation are super useful because you go in search of things, and then when you know what they are, then you can just write it down on your to-do list. And so it might be the case that in, let's say, the month of, I don't know, September of this year, you go super experimental And then in October, you're like, well, I found a bunch of stuff, but I don't know what it is. And then in November, you're like, I don't actually need to keep any of the experimental stuff. I'm just going to write some guitar songs. But then you go to record the guitar songs and you're like, oh, I can do this and this and this and this. And it comes out sounding a lot like the experimental stuff. But you could just envision the whole process because you discovered all of these things. So I think it's really not like a process of experimentation versus like a 1, 2, 3 done process. In the long term, there's strategies of, or their approaches to making that can inform each other and kind of feed back on each other in a larger life, I think, as a musician. And that's how it's been for me. And like recently, just being able to have really simple, I mean, there's also discovery, but there are so many just simple things that I know. Like if I try to track guitars like this, I'm not going to like the result. But if I change this one thing, I'll open up a whole world that feels like me, you know? Or like when I was making a lot of the demos for the songs record I'm working on right now, I was just like, oh, I just want to like start with programming like a UK dubstep 2000s like burial style beat. And that'll just awaken all these things in me that are exciting, even if the end result sounds nothing like that. So I just know that I have that as a start point. Whereas if I program like a 70s rock beat, I'm not gonna have a response to it. You know, like I'm gonna be like, just like fuck, how do I get out of this? Like this, I'm stuck. Like this awakens nothing in me, you know? Yeah. And so just being able to sort of chunk really big and be like, oh, this type of thing is gonna get me somewhere. Is useful. So I'm talking with my hands a lot. But yeah, does this feel like it's kind of answering your question?
For sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Reminds me of when I was in college, I used to record friends for like a 24 pack or like a fifth or something. And just by recording stuff that they had rehearsed and they were ready to go and just like wanted to get something done in like a couple hours, um, there are a lot of like mixing and mastering decisions that you make on the fly as you're like doing stuff that really created an interesting sound. Um, and so, yeah, like I think being able to have a sense of trust and get off the intersection that you're familiar with and just like be like, okay, there's an element of discovery that's going to take place and that's
Yeah.
fine. And that's part of it, as opposed to like, I'm lost, I don't know where I am, you know, I was supposed to be over here and now I'm over here type of thing. um yeah, it's all like headspace stuff, you know. Sometimes like there's little to no filter and you're just open to whatever, like in those hot moments when like things are going well.
Mhm.
um and other times you just want a good song and you're like, this isn't a good song, I need this to be a good song, and that's like where you get tripped up and um keep kind of like going back to the drawing board and not necessarily being like stoked on what you're doing.
Mm.
Similar also to like, there was a period where I was doing a song a week and it was just like, I'm throwing this away, like I'm just gonna do it, and then if it works, it works. If it doesn't, there's another one next week type of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's lots of opportunities there. uh I still think I have to like change the layout of my hardware so that it's like super accessible. I've tried a million things. I have like a tape recorder if I'm like right in the middle of something and I just need to record it so that I
Mhm.
don't lose it. And then I have like my digital 8 and stuff. But I think what I want to do is like have multiple power strips that have everything plugged in, and then I can just like, oh, like here's all my recording stuff. It's already ready to go, but like it's not on the strip all the time.
Mm.
Um, Something like that. Like just getting interrupted during that like spicy moment is enough to kind of turn off
Yeah.
all the inertia that was building up, you know?
Yeah. Um, yeah, there's a lot that could be talked about there. I've got a thought that's related to all of this. And also like, I mean, if you want to talk about that stuff or like talk about your specific workflow or like pedals, like super down for that either tonight or sometime soon. But there's something else going on here that you're talking about with the sound of this part of this record, this the end of Only Shallow, which is that like, 'cause I still have our chat pulled up on the side of the screen. I never X out of that box. Seeing, you know, like other shoegaze albums, we don't really get this wide sound, and like the Swirlies record is more kind of boxed in. It's like a narrow sound.
Mhm.
And so there's a funny thing, which is that like no matter how you're playing the guitar, no matter how you set up the guitar in the room, the way that something like width is going to translate to a recording has everything to do with how it's mic'd. And also from there, what types of processing you're doing. Like, depending, because I mean, I'm super into Ableton right now, you know, and so like for me, I could take a mono signal and get that effect, you know, just through a bunch of like stuff that comes with Ableton. But I think the way to do it in a more old school way would involve, you know, stereo miking and stuff like that. But like there's as much going on, in the way the sound is like processed as the setup of the instrument itself. And just like really quick, like if people aren't taking stereo image into account as an element of the creative process, you can wind up with something that has a very like it's a very realistic sound, where like if everybody's mic'd and the mics are pointing at them, you know, and they're, you know, you'll just have a recording where everything's in mono, you know, everything's straight down the middle. Maybe there's some panning to like imitate the sound of a room, you know, but the type of processing that we're talking about has a lot more to do with, I mean, for me, it has a lot to do with headphones, you know. I'm sure that there are explanations for it that could also have to do with monitors, but it's like, it's less about this is the sound of a band in the room, and more like this is a sound that somebody's going to listen to. This is a recording that somebody's going to listen to. And I wouldn't describe it as like an anti-realistic sound or like a synthetic sound. Like I had a friend who described a Frank Ocean record that way to me recently, and it's like, kind of like, I think that's probably true. That's kind of like a studio creation. But to me, it's more about just speaking directly to the listener and having the recording technology be a tool to communicate with somebody directly, as opposed to being sort of like an intermediate stage between a band in a room and a listener, you know? And so, yeah, like not only is the sound very wide, and we have wide sound with maybe either just on the sides, or there's a bunch of stuff scooped out in the middle. And then we have another sound that's very narrow and it's right in the center, you know? So thinking about stereo image as a creative dimension is super useful.
With something like guitar lessons, like I want to play that Robert Fripp solo, or like this is the sound I'm going for, versus with this class, it's more about finding your sound, which I think is extremely important if you're trying to create like meaningful music that connects with people, but also with yourself. Like none of us are blank slates. Everybody coming into this course identifies in some way or another as an artist or a musician who, again, hasn't necessarily unlocked what they want to unlock.
I'm currently opening up a limited number of 45-minute strategy calls. On the calls, we're going to 1, get serious about your goals, 2, identify what's holding you back, and 3, make a roadmap together for how you can move forward and really achieve those goals. And after that, if it's a fit, we'll talk about working together. So if you're ready to grow as a guitarist, as an artist, and maybe even as a human being, there should be a little button below where you can click to book a time. So bring your story and we'll do the rest together. See you soon.